My oldest son had not called me in 4 months. So when the phone rang at 3 in the morning, and I saw Thomas's name glowing on the screen, I knew something was wrong before I even picked it up. His voice was barely a whisper. "Dad, sell the house before Friday. Do not ask me why. Just trust me." I sat up in the dark and listened to the silence after he hung up. 73 years I have lived on this earth, and 42 of them I have spent on this land. I built this orchard with my bare hands. And my son, who had not set foot on this farm in 2 years, was telling me to let it all go before the week was out. I truly appreciate you being here. Before we continue, leave a comment telling me where you are watching from, your city or country. It means more than you think. Also, please note this story includes some fictional elements for storytelling and learning purposes. Names and settings may be coincidental, but the message is meant to stay with you. I pulled the phone away from my ear and looked at the screen for a long moment. The light from it cast a pale blue glow across the quilt that Helen had stitched the winter before Meredith was born. That quilt had been on this bed for 37 years. The stitching along the left edge had come loose twice, and Helen had repaired it both times without being asked, the way she handled most things that needed mending in this house. Quietly, completely, before anyone else noticed they were broken. Thomas had not said goodbye. He had not waited for me to respond. He had delivered his words the way a man delivers something he has been carrying for too long and needs to set down before it pulls him under. I knew that sound. I had heard it in my own voice during the years Helen was sick. That particular tightness that comes from holding back everything except the one thing you absolutely need the other person to hear. I set the phone face down on the nightstand and sat on the edge of the bed. The house was doing what old houses do at 3 in the morning, settling into its own weight, the floorboards speaking their quiet language, the October wind pressing against the stone walls the way it had pressed against them every autumn for 42 years. Helen and I had built this farmhouse ourselves in 1981, with local stone and more stubbornness than money. Every sound it made was familiar to me. The creak of the second step on the staircase, the way the kitchen window rattled when the wind came from the northwest, the particular groan of the front door when the humidity dropped in late September. I knew this house the way I knew my own breathing, so deeply that I had stopped noticing it years ago. I pulled on my robe and went downstairs. The kitchen was dark except for the small light above the sink, the one that cast a warm yellow circle across the backsplash tile that Helen had picked out from a catalog she ordered from a shop in Staunton. She had spent 2 weekends deciding between 4 shades of cream before choosing the one she said reminded her of morning light on the Orchard Hills. I had told her they all looked the same. She had looked at me with that expression she reserved for moments when I was being honest about my limitations and said, "Robert Arthur Whitfield, you are a man of many gifts, but color is not among them." I made coffee the way my father had shown me when I was 11 years old, measured the grounds by hand, brought the water to just under a boil, and let it steep in the old enamel pot that had belonged to my parents before it belonged to me. Some mornings the ritual of it was all I had. The rhythm of a thing done the same way 1,000 times becomes its own kind of comfort, a small proof that the world is still organized along the lines you remember. While the coffee brewed, I walked to the window and looked out. The orchard was invisible in the dark, but I knew it was there the way you know your own hand is there when you close your eyes. 85 acres of apple trees stretching down the slope toward the creek bed and then climbing again toward the tree line along the Blue Ridge foothills. Helen used to say that God had painted the valley and then decided to leave the brushes out in case anyone wanted to add something. She talked about the world the way a woman talks about a place she feels genuinely at home in, with affection and a little bit of wonder, even after 40 years of seeing the same hills from the same window. Helen had been gone 3 years. Pancreatic cancer. Diagnosed in the fall of 2019. She died on a cold Tuesday morning in February of 2021. In our bedroom upstairs, with her hand in mine and the winter light coming through the curtains in that thin, silver way it has in the valley. When the temperature drops below freezing, I had held her hand for a long time after she was gone. I had not known what else to do. The coffee finished, and I poured a cup and carried it to the kitchen table. That was when the photograph on the wall caught me the way it sometimes did, without warning, in the specific stillness of early morning when the house was too quiet to hide anything. Helen had framed it herself the Christmas before her diagnosis. The four of us on the porch of this house on a July afternoon, the orchard green and full behind us, Helen in her wide-brimmed hat, laughing at something Thomas had said. Thomas standing beside me, 19 years old, tanned from a summer of working the harvest, looking like he believed the world was a place that would always make sense. Meredith sitting cross-legged on the porch railing with a book in her lap, 12 years old, watching the camera with that quiet, evaluating expression she had carried since she was small, as if she were deciding whether this moment was worth remembering before she committed to being fully inside it. I stood with my coffee and looked at that photograph for a long time. I tried to recall the last time it had felt like that. Easy, unguarded. The way a family is supposed to feel when no one is keeping score. Before Helen got sick. Before Thomas stopped coming home. Before Meredith married a man who smiled like he had been practicing it. Before Sunday dinners started carrying the weight of things no one was willing to say out loud. I sat down, wrapped both hands around the mug, and let the house settle around me. Outside, the darkness was beginning to thin along the ridgeline. The first pale suggestion of dawn pressing against the edge of the mountains. A barn owl called once from somewhere near the equipment shed and then went quiet. Thomas had asked me to trust him. 73 years had taught me at least this much, that the answers that matter most are not the ones you chase down. They are the ones that find you when you are finally still enough to receive them. So I sat in my kitchen, in the house I had built with my wife on land I had worked with my hands, and I waited. I did not know yet what I was waiting for. But something in me, the same instinct that had told me which trees to plant and which ground to trust and which men to do business with for 40 years, said to stay right here and not move until the morning brought whatever it was going to bring. The clock on the wall read 3:47. The coffee was already going cold. I drank it anyway. I had been sitting at that kitchen table long enough for the sky to shift from black to the deep iron gray that comes just before first light in the valley. I stood and walked to the window above the sink and looked out at the orchard. The trees were still just shapes in the darkness, rows of shadow running down the hillside toward the creek. But I could see enough to know that everything was where it had always been. The fence posts along the north boundary, the equipment shed with its tin roof, catching the faintest edge of dawn. The dirt road curving down past the cold storage building toward the county highway. It all looked the same as it had looked yesterday and the day before that. And every morning for as long as I could remember standing at this window. That was exactly the problem. You live on a piece of land long enough, and you stop seeing it. You stop noticing the way the morning mist gathers in the low ground between the rows, or the way the first light touches the tops of the oldest trees while the rest of the orchard is still in shadow. You stop seeing it because it becomes so deeply yours that looking at it is like looking at your own hands. Familiar past the point of observation. In the spring of 1981, none of it was here. I was 31 years old with $600 in a savings account, a set of tools that fit in the back of a pickup truck, and a piece of paper from the Shenandoah Valley Land Trust that said I now owned 85 acres of overgrown pasture that had not been worked in a decade. The bank in Staunton had given me a loan that the loan officer himself seemed uncertain about. He had looked at me across his desk and said, "Mr. Whitfield, I hope you understand what you are taking on." I told him I did. I was not entirely sure that was true. Helen drove out with me the first morning. She was 29 years old and had the kind of quiet certainty that I have never been able to replicate in myself. The certainty of a woman who does not need the world to agree with her in order to know what she thinks. We stood at the top of the hill where the farmhouse would eventually be, and looked down at 85 acres of wild grass and scrub oak and tangled fence line. And she said, without any hesitation at all, "This is where we are going to build everything." We planted the first apple tree together that afternoon. A wine sap, chosen because Helen had read that they did well in Virginia clay and because she liked the name. She held the sapling steady while I packed the earth around the roots, and when it was done, she pressed both hands flat against the soil and looked up at me and said, "This tree will outlive both of us, Arthur." She said it simply, the way she said most things that turned out to be important. Not as a prediction. As a fact she had already accepted. She was right. That tree is still standing. It is the oldest tree on the property now. Thick-trunked and gnarled in the way that apple trees get after 4 decades. Its branches reaching wide enough to shade a circle of ground 20 feet across. Helen is buried beneath it. That was her request, made quietly one afternoon in the bedroom during the last month, and I honored it without discussion, because some things do not require discussion. They simply require doing. The years between that first planting and the morning I was standing in my kitchen wondering what my son was afraid to tell me had been full in the way that years are full when you are building something from the ground up. Thomas came first, born in the summer of 1982 in the hospital in Staunton, while I paced the hallway and tried not to look like a man who had no idea what he was doing. He grew up in the orchard. The way children grow up, in places that are too large and too alive to be boring. He learned to climb before he could read. He learned the names of apple varieties before he could reliably spell his own name. By the time he was 12, he could walk a row of trees and tell you which ones needed pruning and which ones had a fungal problem just from the color of the leaves. He had Helen's eyes, serious and watchful, and my stubbornness, which Helen said was not a compliment. Meredith came 5 years later in the fall of 1987 and surprised us both. Helen cried when she found out. Not from worry, she told me later, but from the particular joy of being given something you had not known to ask for. Meredith was different from Thomas, from her earliest days. Quieter, more interior. She was the kind of child who would sit under the old winesap tree for an entire afternoon, with a book, and not speak to anyone. And when you asked her what she had been reading, she would look at you with those dark, thoughtful eyes and give you an answer that made you feel like you were the one who had something to learn. Helen used to say that Meredith had been born already knowing things. I thought it was a mother's pride talking. I think about that differently now. We opened the cider house in the fall of 1993. Helen had been the one to push for it. She said the orchard could not survive on wholesale fruit alone, that we needed to build something with a name people would remember. She was right about that, too. Whitfield Orchard's apple cider became the thing that put us on the map. Sold at farm stands and farmers markets across the valley, and eventually in specialty stores as far away as Richmond and Charlottesville. The cider house was a small stone building at the bottom of the hill near the creek, and on pressing days in October the smell of it, sweet and sharp and heavy, would drift up the slope and settle over the whole property like a second atmosphere. Earl Hammond walked onto the property in the spring of 1998, looking for seasonal work, and ended up staying for 28 years. He was a compact, careful man, with a gift for machinery and a way of being present without taking up space. He became my orchard manager, then my bookkeeper, then the kind of friend you do not have to explain yourself to, because he has been standing close enough for long enough to already understand. Earl knew every tree on this property by location. He knew which rows drained poorly in wet years and which sections caught the late frost. He knew the business the way Helen knew it, from the inside, with the kind of attention that only comes from caring about something beyond what it pays you. Those were good years. I want to be clear about that. Not easy years. There were seasons when the frost came early and took a third of the crop. There were years when the price of apples dropped low enough that I sat at this kitchen table and wondered whether the whole thing was going to come apart. But they were good years, in the way that matters, the way that has nothing to do with money and everything to do with the feeling of walking through your own orchard at sunrise, with the people you love nearby, and the work of your hands visible in every direction. Those were the years I did not fully appreciate while I was living them. I know that now. I know it the way you only know something after it has already changed shape and become something you can no longer reach. Helen got sick in the fall of 2019, and by the time we understood what it meant, we had already lost the version of her that might have told me everything I needed to know. But before the diagnosis, before the hospital rooms, and the slow narrowing of everything. There was a Thursday evening in the spring of 2018 when Meredith called to say she was bringing someone to dinner. She said it was important and that she hoped I would keep an open mind. She said that last part twice. James Caldwell walked through my front door at 6:15 carrying a bottle of wine from a vineyard in Charlottesville and wearing the kind of smile that settles onto a man's face like it was designed for the room he is standing in. He was 40, well-built, dressed carefully without being obvious about it. He shook my hand with the firm grip of a man who understood that first impressions on fathers are investments, not courtesies. He said it was an honor to meet me. He used the word honor. Over dinner, he asked about the orchard with specificity that suggested research. He asked about frost mitigation in the valley. He asked about the economics of small-batch cider in a market trending toward industrial scale. He said what I had built was exactly the kind of operation the country needed more of. Honest work, family roots, built on a handshake. I liked him. I want to be honest about that. I liked him the way you like a man, who seems to see the things you are most proud of and knows exactly what they are worth. Meredith watched James talk the way a person watches something they have been waiting to show someone. There was pride in her face and something underneath it I could not name. I thought it was happiness. That night, after they had gone, Helen sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the wall before she said anything. I knew that look. It meant she had been holding something all evening. That man studies people the way a buyer studies property, she said. Not unkindly. Just plainly. He is not interested in the orchard, Arthur. He is interested in what the orchard is worth. Summon. Not unkindly. I told her she was being unfair. Helen nodded slowly in the way she had when she disagreed with me, but had decided the argument could wait. She did not bring it up again. She did not say I was right, either. They married in the spring of 2019 at a small venue in Staunton. Meredith was radiant. I walked her down the aisle and felt that particular pride that fathers carry in those moments, enormous and bittersweet in equal measure. James stood at the front watching Meredith with an expression I read as devotion. Helen, sitting in the front row, watched James with an expression I did not read at all. The diagnosis came 5 months later. Pancreatic. Stage 3. The doctors explained the options in language that was gentle and thorough, and ultimately meant the same thing, regardless of which path we chose. Helen listened with her hands folded and asked 2 practical questions. Then we drove home in silence, and she stood in the kitchen looking out at the orchard, and I stood behind her, and neither of us spoke, because there was nothing to say that was large enough. The next 2 years were what they were. I will not dwell on them, because the people who have lived through something like that already understand, and the people who have not cannot be told. In one of the quiet afternoons near the end, Helen turned her head on the pillow and looked at me with the directness she reserved for things that mattered most. Promise me, you will listen to Thomas, she said. He sees things clearly, and whatever happens, do not give up on Meredith. She is still the little girl who read books under the apple tree. She will need her father most when she feels the most lost. I squeezed her hand and told her of course I would. I did not ask why she felt the need to say it. I assumed it was the kind of thing a mother says when she is thinking about leaving her children behind. She also spoke privately with Thomas. She told him something that included the words, "Do not take your eyes off the orchard." Thomas never told me exactly what else she said. I did not press him. I thought there would be time. Helen died on a Tuesday morning in February of 2021. We buried her beneath the winesap tree she had planted with me 40 years earlier. The one she said would outlive both of us. The ground was frozen, and the men who dug the grave had to work slowly. Thomas stood at the graveside with his jaw tight and his eyes dry. Meredith stood beside James and held herself together in the way of someone who has decided that falling apart is not available today. After the funeral, Thomas stopped coming home. Not suddenly. He simply called less, visited less, answered less. He moved from Portland to Richmond, closer by 1,000 miles, but no closer in any way that mattered. And Meredith. The changes came slowly, the way weather changes when a front moves in. She answered questions a beat too short. She laughed a fraction too quick. She stopped finishing her sentences around James, not in the way of a comfortable couple, but in the way of someone who has learned to check themselves before going too far. Her eyes moved toward James whenever the conversation found any edge. She stopped coming to the farm alone. James was always there, always warm, always managing the room with a hand on her shoulder that ended whatever we had been building toward. I noticed. I told myself it was adjustment. I told myself James was a good man, and that whatever distance had grown was normal. I had been telling myself that story for 5 years. Sitting in my kitchen with the morning wearing on, I wondered how long a man could keep telling himself a story before it started to feel like something else entirely. Standing in my kitchen 3 years after lowering Helen into the ground beneath her own tree, I understood for the first time that she had not been speaking in generalities. She had been telling me something specific, something urgent, and I had held her hand and said, "Of course." And I had not listened to a single word. The clock on the wall above the stove read 8:45 when the phone rang again. I had been sitting at the table for nearly 5 hours, the coffee pot empty, the morning light now fully through the kitchen windows and lying flat across the floor in long, pale rectangles. I had not moved except to refill my cup twice, and to stand once at the window watching the sun clear the ridgeline and light up the top rows of the orchard in that slow golden way it does in October, touching the oldest trees first the way morning light always does, as if it knows which ones have earned it. The name on the screen was Earl Hammond. Earl had worked my books and managed my orchard for 28 years. In all that time, I had never once heard his voice sound the way it sounded when I answered. "Hey there," he said. Just those 2 words, and already I could hear it. A flatness underneath the casual greeting, the sound of a man reciting lines he had practiced before making a call he did not want to make. I had known Earl long enough to recognize every register his voice could carry. Laughing, tired, irritated, thoughtful. What I was hearing now was none of those. What I was hearing was performance. "Earl," I said, "what is going on?" It was not a question the way I said it. He heard that. There was a pause on his end that lasted long enough to tell me everything I needed to know about whether this was going to be a simple conversation. I heard him breathe in, slowly, then out. "Check your mailbox, Arthur." His voice had dropped, gone careful and low. "There might be something from the bank. I think you should look at it before you do anything else today." And before I could ask which bank or what something or why he sounded like a man standing at the edge of a thing he did not want to look down into, the line went quiet. He had ended the call. I stood in the kitchen with the phone in my hand and looked at it. 28 years. 28 years of Monday morning conversations and harvest season planning, and the kind of friendship that does not require maintenance because it runs on something deeper than convenience. Earl Hammond did not hang up on people. Earl Hammond did not speak in careful, practiced sentences. Earl Hammond did not tell you to check your mailbox and then disappear before you could ask why. I went to the front door and stepped outside. The morning air came in cool and sharp, carrying the smell of ripe apples from the near rows and the faint sweetness of decay from the drops that had fallen overnight and were already softening in the grass. The mailbox stood at the end of the dirt road where it met the county highway, a quarter mile from the house. Helen had picked it out from a hardware store in Harrisonburg because she liked the shape of it, a simple black metal box on a cedar post. I had teased her about driving 45 minutes for a mailbox. She had told me I lacked an eye for things that mattered quietly. There was a single envelope inside. White, standard business size. The return address of Shenandoah Valley National Bank printed in the upper left corner. I carried it back to the house and stood in the entryway and looked at it for a moment before opening it. My name on the front, my address. Everything correct and ordinary. The letter inside was 3 pages. The language was formal and dense, full of reference numbers and account identifiers, and phrases like, pursuant to the terms of and as per the executed agreement. I read the first paragraph twice before the meaning of it assembled itself in my mind. Then I went back and read it from the beginning. The property at this address. The farmhouse that Helen and I had built in 1981. The 85 acres of orchard land that I had worked every season for 42 years. The land where Thomas had learned to climb, and Meredith had read her books, and Helen had planted the winesap tree that now shaded her grave. That property had been refinanced 4 weeks prior. A new mortgage had been executed against it at 80% of its assessed value. The paperwork had been signed and submitted and processed. I read my own signature at the bottom of the reference documents. My name in my handwriting on a line I could not remember standing over. I could remember the dinner. A Tuesday evening, 3 months ago. Meredith and James had come out to the farm. James had cooked, which he sometimes did. And afterward, over coffee at this same kitchen table, he had slid a small stack of papers across the surface with a relaxed explanation. Just a refinancing, Arthur. Better rate. Nothing complicated. Standard financial housekeeping. He had smiled the way he always smiled. Easy and certain, and Meredith had nodded beside him the way she might nod if someone mentioned the weather was going to be nice this weekend. I could remember signing. I could not remember reading. I stood in my own entryway with that letter in my hands, and the floor felt different under my feet. Not unsteady exactly. Just different. Like something that had always been reliable, had quietly reclassified itself. My signature. My land. 42 years of mortgage payments and fence repairs and harvest seasons, and the memories of a life built on this ground. My own name on a document I had not read. Signed over a plate of Meredith's apple pie, while James refilled everyone's water glass. The phone in my hand buzzed. Not Thomas. Not Earl. A number I did not recognize with a Staunton area code. I looked at it for a moment, standing in the entryway with the bank letter still in my other hand, and the morning light coming through the front door and falling across the hardwood floor that Helen and I had sanded and finished ourselves the summer. Thomas turned. 3. Then I answered, Mr. Whitfield. The voice on the other end was measured and professional. The kind of voice that has learned to deliver difficult information without letting emotion get ahead of the facts. This is Detective Carolyn Webb, with the Augusta County Sheriff's Office. I am sorry to contact you under these circumstances. I need to ask you a few questions about your business. Whitfield Orchards. I moved to the armchair by the front window and sat down. The bank letter was still in my other hand. I set it face down on the side table without looking at it. Go ahead, I said. Detective Webb explained it plainly. There had been an incident at the cider house earlier that morning. A worker had been injured. Not seriously, she was quick to say, but enough to require medical attention and trigger a mandatory safety report. In the course of that report, inspectors had reviewed the facility's compliance records and found several violations logged under my name. Violations that suggested a pattern of negligence going back several months. I told her that was not possible. I told her I had run a clean operation for 4 decades, that we had passed every inspection the county had ever conducted, that whatever those records showed, something was wrong with them. Detective Webb paused the way investigators pause when they are about to say something they know is going to land hard. Mr. Whitfield, our records show that your access card was used to enter the cider house at 7:03 this morning. Is that accurate? No, I said. That is not accurate. I have been at home since before 3 this morning. I never went in. Another pause. Is there anyone who can verify that for you, sir? I looked around the room. The armchair I was sitting in. The lamp Helen had found at an antique market in Lexington. The front door closed and locked. The house was as still as it always was when I was the only one in it. No, I said. I live alone. I drove to the cider house. I do not remember making a conscious decision to do so. I simply found myself pulling on my jacket and picking up my keys and walking out the front door. The way the body sometimes moves ahead of the mind, when the mind is still catching up to something it does not want to accept. The drive from the farmhouse down the hill to the cider house took 4 minutes on the dirt road. On a clear morning, I could have walked it in 15. I pulled into the gravel lot and parked near the side entrance and sat in the truck for a moment looking through the windshield at a scene that did not belong to me. There were 2 vehicles I did not recognize parked near the main doors. A man I had never seen was standing near the entrance with a clipboard, talking to one of my seasonal workers. And there, near the corner of the building, speaking in a low and practiced voice to the worker who had reportedly been injured, was a man in a charcoal suit carrying a leather briefcase. I knew that suit. I had seen it at holiday dinners. It belonged to a man named Hargrove, who worked out of an office in Staunton and whose name I had heard exactly once, mentioned by James at a family gathering as the person who handled his business affairs. Hargrove was here. He was already here, already talking, already managing the situation, before I had even known there was a situation to manage, before Detective Webb had finished her phone call with me. James's legal representation had been standing on my property before I arrived. There is only one way a lawyer arrives at a scene before the person who owns the building does. He had to have known it was coming. I sat in my truck and turned that over carefully. James had planned for today. Not reacted to it. Planned for it. The access card that had logged an entry at 7:03 belonged to me, which meant someone had gotten close enough to copy the chip. The kind of reader that does that fits in a jacket pocket. You could reach across a man at a dinner table for the salt and have his card cloned before the bread made it back around. I thought about how many dinners James had attended, how many times he had sat close enough to reach across me, the worker who had been hurt. I could see him from where I sat, a younger man I did not recognize, sitting on a crate near the wall while Hargrove spoke to him. Someone hired through a placement service, the kind of arrangement that creates distance between the person giving instructions and the person carrying them out. If I had come to work this morning the way I had come to work every Monday morning for 40 years, I would have walked through that door at 7 and found whatever had been arranged waiting for me. My card in the log, my name on the violations, my property, my responsibility, my signature on everything. Thomas had told me not to come in. He had called at 3 in the morning and told me to sell everything before Friday. He had known, not guessed, known. Whatever Thomas had found, whatever had driven him to pick up the phone in the dark and speak to me in that tight, desperate whisper, it was connected to this. To the bank letter on my side table, to Hargrove standing in my parking lot, to a plan that had been built carefully, patiently, the way you build something when you are certain the person you are building it around will never see it coming. I pulled out my phone and called Meredith. She answered on the second ring, which struck me as quick. The kind of quick that suggests someone has been waiting for a particular call. Dad. Her voice was even, composed in a way that did not match the gravity of what I was calling about. I heard there was something at the cider house this morning. Are you okay, Meredith? James's attorney is standing in my parking lot right now. He was here before I even knew what happened. Can you explain to me how that is possible? The smallest pause. Dad. Calm down. James is already handling it. You do not need to worry about this. She said it the way people say things they have rehearsed, not unkindly, with a smoothness that had nothing natural in it. I sat in my truck in the parking lot of the business I had spent 40 years building and listened to my daughter tell me not to worry, and felt something shift in my chest that had nothing to do with the bank letter sitting on my side table at home. This was not James handling a problem. This was James having prepared for one. I drove to my daughter's house without calling ahead. If I called, the right words would be chosen and the right expressions rehearsed before I arrived. I needed to see them as they were, not as they had prepared to be. The drive from the cider house to the town took 20 minutes through the valley on roads I had known since before they were paved. Meredith and James lived in a restored colonial on a quiet street near the center of town. White clapboard, black shutters, a porch with 2 rocking chairs that Meredith had bought at a craft fair the first summer after they moved in. I had helped carry boxes through that front door 7 years ago, while Helen handed out sandwiches from a cooler she had packed that morning. That felt like someone else's life now. James answered the door. He was dressed casually. Dark slacks, a collared shirt with the top button undone, and he smiled when he saw me with the particular ease of a man who has never once been caught off guard by a doorbell. "Come on in, Robert. Let me handle this. I am here to protect the family." Those words settled over me like something cold. I had heard him use that phrase before, at holiday dinners, at family discussions that somehow always ended with James steering the outcome. I had always taken it as loyalty. Standing in that entryway, I was no longer sure what it was. Meredith was in the living room sitting on the edge of the couch with her hands folded in her lap. The kind of careful stillness I recognized from hospital waiting rooms years ago, when any movement felt like it might make things worse. She looked up when I came in, and for just a moment, something passed across her face that I could not name. I sat down across from her. "Hi, Meredith," I said. "I need to understand what is happening." James positioned himself near the kitchen doorway, close enough to be present, far enough to seem like he was giving us space. "Dad," Meredith began. "Arthur." James's voice was warm, measured. "Everything is being handled. There is no reason for anyone to be upset." I looked at Meredith. She did not look at me. She was looking at her hands, and I watched her take a slow breath through her nose. The kind a person takes when they are trying to hold something in. I had seen that breath before on Helen, in the weeks before she finally told me how frightened she was. I had learned too late then that it meant I want to say something, and I cannot. I asked James if I could speak with my daughter alone. He smiled and said there was no need for that. Anything I wanted to say, I could say to both of them. Meredith still did not look up. I asked 2 more questions. Both times James answered before she could open her mouth. Not aggressively, never aggressively. Just filling every silence so completely there was no room left for anyone else. By the time the conversation wound down, I realized I had not exchanged more than 3 sentences directly with my daughter. I stood, shook James's hand, and told them I would be in touch. Meredith walked me to the door. On the threshold, she raised her eyes to mine. What I saw was not anger, not guilt, something quieter and more absolute than either, and it stopped me cold. I had spent 40 years learning to read the people I loved. I knew what fear looked like on someone trying very hard not to show it. My daughter was afraid. Not of me. Of the man standing 15 feet behind her in his own living room. And she was afraid the way someone is when they have been afraid for a long time and learned to wear it like a second skin. I drove home without the radio. The valley unrolled around me in its October colors, gold and red, and the deep brown of fields already harvested, and I saw none of it. I was seeing my daughter's eyes. I was seeing the way she had folded her hands in her lap and not moved them once during the entire visit. I was seeing the particular angle of her shoulders, drawn inward, compressed, the posture of someone who has made herself smaller so many times it has become the default shape. It was just past 7 when I walked into my kitchen and opened the refrigerator. Meredith left a jar of fresh pressed cider on the second shelf every Sunday, a quiet habit she had kept since Helen passed, her way of making sure I was not letting things slide. Every Sunday a fresh jar. I had never thought to question it. I poured a glass and sat down at the table. The first sip was ordinary. The second made me pause. It was subtle, not bitter, not off in any way I could have described clearly. A faint something at the back of the taste, a quality that did not quite match the cider I had been pressing on this farm for 30 years. I sat with it, the glass cool between my palms, trying to decide if I was imagining things. I was not. I did not know what I was tasting. But something in me, the same instinct that had made me stay home when Thomas called, the same one that had kept me clear-headed through 40 years of running a business that did not reward carelessness, said to stop. I carried the glass to the sink and poured the rest out. Then I stood there for a moment, looking at the drain. I did not throw the jar away. I sealed it in a zip bag and set it at the back of the counter away from everything else. I did not fully know why. I just knew I might need it later. I did not sleep that night. I lay on top of the covers in the dark, and the thoughts came the way they always do when there is nothing to crowd them out. Meredith's eyes at the threshold. James at the doorway. I am here to protect the family. The cider, that faint wrong note at the back of my tongue. Helen's voice from the bedroom 3 years ago. Promise me, you will listen to Thomas. Outside the window, the sky over the valley was completely dark. No stars. No movement. Just silence, total and absolute. I kept coming back to the same thing. Not the bank letter. Not the police call. My daughter's face. The way she had looked at me for that one unguarded second before the door closed. She was still inside that house. And whatever she was afraid of, she was still inside it with her. The knock came just after 5:30 in the morning. I had given up on sleep somewhere around 4 and was sitting at the kitchen table with a glass of water, watching the darkness outside the window thin toward the first gray of dawn. 3 quiet taps, evenly spaced. The kind that said, I am here, and I have been driving through the dark to get to you. I crossed the hallway and opened the front door and found Thomas standing on the porch. His jacket was still cold from the outside air. His hair was uncombed, and his eyes had the particular redness of a man who has been staring at a road for hours without blinking enough. He had a canvas tote bag over one shoulder, and he looked exhausted in the way that goes deeper than not sleeping. The exhaustion of someone who has been carrying something heavy and has finally arrived at the place where he can set it down. I drove straight through from Richmond, he said before I could ask. Left right after I hung up with you. Got here around 7:30 yesterday morning. I stared at him. Yesterday morning? You have been here since yesterday. Where have you been? He reached into his jacket pocket and held up a key. The old brass one that Helen had kept on a hook by the laundry room door. The spare key to the farmhouse that I had not moved since she passed. I let myself in while you were out at the cider house, he said. I did not want to explain anything until I had something real to show you. He stepped inside and set the tote bag on the kitchen table and sat down in the chair across from mine. The same chair Helen used to sit in when we went over the books together on Sunday evenings. Her reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. A pencil behind her ear. Thomas sat in it now, with the particular weight of a man who has been rehearsing this conversation for hours and still does not know exactly how to begin. Dad. His voice was quiet but steady. I need you to listen to me for a few minutes before you say anything. I sat down across from him and I listened. He had noticed the changes over the past several months, he said. Not in person. We had not seen each other often enough for that. But over the phone. Small things at first. I would lose track of a sentence. I would forget something he had told me days earlier. There were afternoons when I sounded tired in a way that had nothing to do with the hour. A heaviness that came and went without explanation. You have always been sharp, he said. You can walk me through every stage of cider, pressing from memory, and not miss a step. So when you started forgetting things, I paid attention. He had been paying attention for longer than I knew. 2 years, he told me. Since the month Helen died. She had spoken to him privately in her last weeks, not just the words I already knew about, not just do not take your eyes off the orchard. She had told him more. She had told him that she had found things in the books that did not add up, transactions she could not account for, small amounts moved in patterns that suggested intent rather than error. She had not had enough time or enough strength to finish what she had started. She had asked Thomas to continue where she left off. He had done it quietly. From Richmond, pulling financial records when he could, cross-referencing invoices with bank statements, tracking the slow movement of money out of accounts that should have been growing. He had not told me because he did not yet have enough to be certain, and because Helen had told him something else in that last conversation, something he repeated to me now with a heaviness that told me he had been carrying it like a stone in his chest for 3 years. She said you would not believe it, he said. She said you would need proof. She said you loved James the way you loved everyone who seemed to love your family, and that your trust was the thing that made you most vulnerable. I did not say anything. I sat and let that settle. Then Thomas told me about the storm. 2 nights ago, Monday night, a line of thunderstorms had pushed through the valley, with winds strong enough to bring down limbs across the county. One of those limbs had come off the oldest tree on the property, the wine sap, the tree Helen and I had planted together in 1981. A major branch on the south side had cracked and fallen, and when it came down, it had torn open a section of the trunk, exposing a hollow space inside the heartwood that neither Thomas nor I, nor anyone else had ever known was there. Earl had gone out Tuesday morning to assess the damage. He had found the broken branch and the torn trunk, and inside the hollow, wrapped in a waterproof zip bag and wedged into the cavity with care, a leather journal. He had called Thomas immediately. Thomas reached into the tote bag and set it on the table between us. It was small, maybe 6 inches by 8, bound in dark brown leather that had gone soft with age. The zip bag had kept it dry. The leather was smooth and uncracked. I knew before I touched it whose hands had put it there. Helen had hidden it inside the tree she had planted the day we bought this land. The tree she said would outlive both of us. She had placed it there sometime in the last months of her life, when she was too weak to walk the orchard alone, which meant she had done it on a day when she had decided the walk was worth the cost. She had sealed it against the weather and trusted the tree to hold it. Thomas opened the tote bag again and set a second item on the table. A printed lab report on white paper, dated yesterday. He had taken a sample from the jar of cider in my refrigerator, the one I had sealed in a zip bag the night before without fully knowing why, and sent it to an independent lab in Charlottesville. The results were on the first page. There is a sedative compound present in the sample, he said. Low concentration, consistent with regular repeated exposure over a period of weeks or months. I looked at the report. I looked at the leather journal. I looked at my son sitting across from me in his mother's chair, with his mother's eyes, and the particular expression of a man who has just laid down everything he has been carrying and is waiting to see whether the person across from him is ready to pick it up. He put his hand on the journal and slid it toward me. "Mom left this for us," he said. "She hid it inside the wine sap. She left a note in the family Bible telling me where to look." He paused. "I found the note 3 years ago, Dad, but the note said to look inside the tree when it was time." I did not know what that meant until the storm broke the branch, and Earl called me Tuesday morning. I reached across the table and placed my hand on the leather cover. It was warm from being inside the bag. It felt like something alive. Thomas watched me without speaking. I opened it to the first page. My wife's handwriting looked back at me, careful and precise. Every letter placed with the deliberateness of someone who knew these words might be the most important she would ever write. Helen's handwriting had not changed in 37 years of marriage. I would have recognized it anywhere. The slight forward lean, the careful spacing, the way she always crossed her letters with a single clean stroke, as if every word was a small decision she had already made before the pen touched the page. She wrote the way she did everything, with intention. The first entry was dated March of 2019, 1 month before Meredith's wedding. Helen had written the date in the upper right corner and underlined it once. The way she underlined things she wanted to come back to. Something is wrong with the accounts. I found it this morning going through the quarterly statements for the cider operation. There is a transfer of $4,200 to an account I do not recognize. The routing number does not match any vendor we have used. I checked the previous quarter. There is another one. $3,800. Different amount. Same destination. I have not said anything to Arthur yet. I need to be sure before I say it out loud. I turned the page. The entries continued through the spring and summer of 2019. Each one dated, each one precise. Helen had tracked the transfers month by month. The amounts varied, but the pattern did not. Money was leaving the orchard's operating accounts in increments small enough to avoid triggering any automatic review, routed through an intermediary account, and then onward to a destination she could not yet identify. She had mapped the flow on a page near the middle of the journal, lines drawn between account numbers in her careful hand, arrows showing direction, question marks beside the nodes she had not yet been able to trace. By the fall of 2019, the entries had taken on a different quality. Helen had begun writing about James. He asked Arthur to add him as a secondary signatory on the business account last week. Arthur agreed without hesitating. I did not say anything at dinner, because I did not want to start an argument in front of Meredith, but I looked at the paperwork afterward. The language gives James access to more than Arthur understands. I do not think Arthur read it carefully. I do not think Arthur reads anything carefully when it comes from someone he has decided to trust. That sentence stopped me. I read it twice and felt the particular sting of a truth you have been avoiding, stated plainly by someone who loved you too much to let it go unsaid. Helen had known. She had known exactly how I worked, exactly where the soft places were, and she had written it down not to wound me, but to document it, the way a woman documents something when she understands that the people she loves may eventually need the evidence more than they need to be protected from it. The entries from 2020 were fewer. Helen's diagnosis had come in September of 19, and by the spring of 2020, the treatments had begun to take what they take. Her handwriting changed. The letters grew slightly larger, slightly less controlled, the pen pressing harder in some places, as if compensating for a hand that was not as steady as it used to be. But the content remained precise. She had written to a woman named Louise in Lexington, Kentucky, an old college friend. Helen had asked Louise to look into a name, Daniel Marsh, and Louise had written back with a newspaper clipping from the Lexington Herald-Leader, dated January of 2014, and a photograph. Helen had taped both inside the journal. The clipping described a civil case involving the financial exploitation of a retired military veteran named Colonel Roy Patterson, whose son-in-law had systematically transferred ownership of a 200-acre horse farm over a period of 18 months before disappearing. The son-in-law's name was Daniel Thomas Marsh. The photograph showed a man in his mid-30s, standing next to an older man at what appeared to be a community event. The younger man was smiling. I knew that smile. I had seen it across my dinner table. I had seen it in my daughter's living room yesterday afternoon. I had seen it at my front door the first evening James Caldwell walked into my life carrying a bottle of wine and the word honor. Helen had written beneath the photograph in handwriting that was beginning to waver, Daniel Thomas Marsh. I believe this is the man Meredith married. I cannot prove it yet. I need more time. I am not sure how much time I have. The entries from the last months of 2020 were the hardest to read. Not because the handwriting had deteriorated, though it had. Because Helen had begun writing about Meredith. She does not finish her sentences anymore. She looks at him before she answers a question. Every question. Even the small ones. She used to laugh the way I laugh. From the stomach. Without checking first to see if it was allowed. I have not heard that laugh in over a year. I asked her last Sunday if she was happy. She smiled and said, "Of course." She smiled the way a woman smiles, when smiling is the safest available option. I closed the journal for a moment and pressed my hand flat against the cover. Thomas was sitting across from me. He had not moved. He had not spoken. He was giving me whatever time and silence the kitchen could hold. I opened it again. The final entry was dated 3 weeks before Helen died. The handwriting was slow and careful, each letter formed with visible effort, as if she had gathered what remained of her strength and spent it on these last words. I have hidden this journal inside the wine sap. I chose that tree because it was the first thing Arthur and I built together on this land, and because a tree does not forget what it holds. I am leaving a note for Thomas in the family Bible. He will know when the time is right. I am sorry I could not finish this. I am sorry I could not say it to Arthur's face. I was afraid he would not believe me. I was afraid it would break something between us that I did not have enough time left to repair. I turned to the last page. Taped inside the back cover was a small envelope, ivory with age, sealed with the kind of care Helen brought to everything she considered important. The handwriting on the front said, "For Arthur, when the time is right." I looked at it for a long moment without touching it. Thomas reached across the table and placed his hand on mine. "Mom left that for you," he said. "I have not opened it. I have never opened it." I picked up the envelope and felt its weight. Light. 1 page. Maybe 2. The paper was soft at the edges, the way paper gets after years inside, something that has kept it safe. Helen had sealed it, and trusted the tree to hold it, and trusted Thomas to find it, and trusted the weather to reveal it when the moment required it. Or maybe she had not trusted any of those things. Maybe she had simply done the best she could with what she had left, and hoped that love and time and one broken branch in an October storm would be enough to carry it the rest of the way. I worked the flap open slowly, not wanting to tear anything. The seal gave way with a soft sound, the kind of sound that small, preserved things make when they are finally opened after years of waiting. Inside was a single folded page, written front and back in the same familiar hand. The ink slightly faded, but every letter still legible. I unfolded it and began to read. She started with the ordinary things. The way she had loved mornings on this farm, the particular quality of the light through the kitchen window at 7 in October, when the sun clears the ridge and the whole room turns gold for about 20 minutes before the angle shifts. The way I looked when I came in from the orchard with mud on my boots and did not notice until she pointed it out. The way Thomas used to run between the rows as a boy with his arms out, like he was trying to catch the wind. The way Meredith would sit beneath the wine sap for hours with a book, perfectly still, perfectly content, as if the tree and the story and the afternoon light were all the company she would ever need. She wrote about what she had built with me, and what she was proud of, and what she was grateful for. She wrote about the mornings and the seasons, and the particular smell of the cider house on pressing days in October, and how she had never once regretted the decision we made in 1981 to spend everything we had on 85 acres of land that no one else wanted. And then, about 2/3 of the way down the second side, the handwriting slowed. I could see it in the spacing, the way the letters became more deliberate, each one placed with extra care. "Arthur, if you are reading this, then something I was afraid of has already begun. I do not know what shape it will take. I only know that I saw things in the last years that I did not speak about enough, and I am sorry for that. I should have said more while I still had time. I should have sat you down at the kitchen table and made you listen the way I made you listen when I told you we needed to open the cider house. But I was afraid. I was afraid you would choose to believe him over me, and I was afraid that choosing would break something between us that I did not have enough time left to fix. Trust Thomas. He has my eyes, but your stubbornness. And he has been watching because I asked him to. And please, whatever happens, do not give up on Meredith. She is still our daughter. She is still the little girl who read books under the apple tree, and some part of her will always be that child, no matter what she has done or what she has allowed to happen. She will need her father most when she feels the most lost. Please, do not let her face that alone. I love you. I have loved you since, before you knew I was paying attention. Take care of yourself, Arthur. Take care of each other. Helen. I read it a second time. Then a third. I was aware of the kitchen around me, the morning light now fully through the windows, the sound of a cardinal somewhere outside in the near orchard, the low hum of the refrigerator doing its patient work. I was aware of Thomas sitting very still across from me, not looking at me, giving me whatever privacy the kitchen table could offer. The feeling that moved through me was not sharp. It came slowly. A gradual change in the quality of the air. A shift in pressure. And then, without quite deciding to, I found that my eyes had gone wet, and the page in my hands had gone slightly blurred. I did not make a sound. I just sat there while it moved through me. Slow and quiet. Like the small, steady rain that does not announce itself, but gets into everything anyway. Thomas reached across the table and took my hand. He did not say anything. He just held it, his fingers folded over mine, the way Helen used to hold my hand in hospital waiting rooms, not to comfort exactly, but to anchor, to say I am here and I am not going anywhere. After a while, I folded the letter carefully along its original creases. I folded it the way you fold something you intend to keep. Precisely. No corners bent. Then I tucked it into the breast pocket of my shirt on the left side and pressed my hand flat against it. "All right," I said. My voice came out rougher than I intended. "What do we do next?" Thomas looked at me with those steady, clear eyes, and I saw something in them. A quiet readiness that told me he had already thought this through before he ever knocked on my door. He had the answer. He had been waiting for me to be ready to hear it. "Doctor first," he said. Then he started the truck. Dr. Miriam Cole's practice was in a low-profile medical building on the western edge of Staunton. No large signage, no busy waiting room. She came out to greet us herself, a woman in her late 50s with reading glasses on a chain around her neck and the measured calm of someone who had been sitting across from difficult situations for a long time. She reviewed the lab results Thomas had brought from the cider sample. Then she conducted a full blood panel on me. 12 vials, processed through an independent laboratory she used for cases requiring confidentiality. While we waited, she asked me to walk her through the past 4 months. My energy levels, my concentration, any instances of confusion or memory difficulty. I told her about mornings at the cider house when I could not remember which orders I had scheduled. I told her about the afternoon I drove past my own road twice before recognizing the turn. I told her about the fatigue that sometimes hit me at 2 in the afternoon, like a door closing. She listened. She wrote things down. When the results came back, she explained them plainly. The compound in my system was a benzodiazepine-class sedative. Low dose. Consistent with what Thomas's preliminary test had identified in the cider. At the level she was seeing, the effects would accumulate gradually. Difficulty concentrating, short-term memory disruption, fatigue that worsened in the afternoons. To anyone without medical training, the presentation would be indistinguishable from the early markers of cognitive decline in an older adult. "You are not experiencing neurological deterioration," she said. "What you are experiencing is the predictable response to prolonged, low-level sedation. Your underlying cognitive function is intact." Thomas drove us home. I sat in the passenger seat with Dr. Cole's report in my hands and watched the valley move past, the orchards, the stone walls, the long curve of the Blue Ridge under an October sky that could not decide between gray and blue. I counted backward. 4 months. Meredith had been bringing the cider every Sunday for as long as I could remember since Helen passed. Every Sunday, a fresh jar. Every Monday, I had thanked her. We were pulling into the farm road when Thomas's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen. Then he looked at me. A court notification. Automated. Formal. James Caldwell had filed a petition for emergency guardianship over Arthur Whitfield. The hearing was scheduled for Monday. 5 business days. 5 days, Dad, Thomas said. I looked at him. Then we have 5 days, I said. Dr. Samuel Reeves had been my physician for 18 years. He had seen me through a cracked rib from a fall off the cider press platform, through the slow deterioration of my left knee, through the annual checkups that Helen used to schedule for me, because she said, if left to my own judgment, I would not see a doctor until something actually fell off. After Helen passed, the checkups became a habit I maintained, because stopping them felt like letting go of one more thing she had put in place. Reeves was a tall man, mid-60s, silver-haired, with the kind of steady professional manner that had always made me trust him without question. When he shook my hand that morning, his eyes went to a point just past my shoulder instead of meeting mine directly, and his grip was half a second shorter than it should have been. Something was wrong. I had spent enough years reading people across tables to know it before he said a word. We followed him back to his office. Thomas sat beside me. The room looked the same as it always had. The watercolor prints, the diplomas on the wall, the faint smell of antiseptic, and the cedar diffuser. His receptionist, kept on the shelf. I had sat in this room more times than I could count. The familiarity of it made what came next harder, not easier. Reeves sat behind his desk and produced a document. 3 pages, formal letterhead. His signature at the bottom of each one. He set it in front of me without quite looking at me and said he needed to discuss some concerns about my cognitive health that had emerged in recent assessments. I did not touch the document. Thomas reached into his bag and placed Dr. Cole's report on the desk between them. His movements were unhurried and deliberate. 8 weeks ago, Thomas said, you completed a routine, physical, and certified my father's health as normal across all measured indicators. Cognitive function included. He tapped Cole's report once. This is an independent assessment conducted yesterday. It confirms that his cognitive function is intact and that any symptoms are consistent with prolonged low-level sedation, not neurological decline. He paused. So, I am curious, Dr. Reeves. What changed in 8 weeks? The silence that followed lasted long enough for me to become aware of the instrumental music still playing somewhere in the walls. Reeves's hands were flat on the desk. I watched his fingers press down against the surface. The way a person presses down on something when they need to feel solid ground. He did not answer. I know about the 40,000, Thomas said. The sound Reeves made was small, barely audible. A shift in his breathing. His shoulders dropped a precise half-inch, and something in his face rearranged itself into an expression I recognized because I had seen it before in my own mirror in the months after certain decisions I had made and regretted. The expression of a man whose private accounting had finally come due. He opened the center drawer of his desk and took out a phone. A prepaid handset. The kind that comes in a drugstore blister pack. He set it on the desk between us. He came to see me in the first week of October, Reeves said. His voice was careful and quiet. He had documentation of an incident from 2014. A prescription error. Minor in the end. No lasting harm to the patient. I reported it and handled it through the appropriate channels at the time. But the way he framed it, the way he described what he could do with it. He stopped. He offered me $40,000 and told me that if I did not cooperate, he would ensure the documentation reached the medical board and 2 journalists who cover healthcare liability in the valley. He had their names ready. He looked at the phone on the desk. I signed the report because I was afraid, he said. I am not offering that as a justification. I am telling you because I think you deserve to know exactly what happened. He pushed the phone toward Thomas. I recorded the conversation with him. I do not know precisely why. I think some part of me understood that I was going to need it eventually. Thomas picked up the phone. He found the audio file and pressed play. James's voice came through the small speaker clearly, unhurried, conversational. The same voice I had heard at holiday dinners and family gatherings. The same voice I had heard 2 days ago in his entryway, telling me he was there to protect the family. He was not angry on the recording. He was not aggressive. He laid out what he knew, what he intended to do with it, and what he was offering in exchange. He did it in the tone of a man discussing a minor administrative matter. Calm, sequential. Each point following the last, with the patience of someone who had rehearsed the architecture of it carefully. I think you will find this arrangement benefits everyone, he said near the end. Mr. Whitfield is getting older. His family is simply trying to ensure he is properly looked after. You would be doing him a kindness, really. I sat and listened to my son-in-law describe the kindness he was doing me. And I felt very still inside. Not the hollow stillness from the parking lot with Thomas, but something cooler and more focused. The stillness of a temperature dropping. Thomas stopped the recording. He looked at Reeves. We will need a formal written statement, he said. And the original recording transferred to an attorney. He said it without anger, in the tone he might use to outline a project timeline. Reeves nodded. He looked diminished, smaller in his chair than he had seemed when we walked in. I will do whatever is required, he said. I should have called someone immediately. I know that. I did not respond. I was not sure what I would have said. Thomas asked for the statement to be ready by end of day, and we left. From the parking lot, Thomas called Rosa Martinez. She was an attorney in Richmond. No connection to James, to Meredith, or to any circle that had already been compromised. Thomas had found her through a colleague. We were in her office by early afternoon. She was in her early 50s. Direct, with the unhurried manner of someone who had learned that urgency is most useful when it does not show on your face. We laid out everything in sequence. The mortgage documents, the cider, Cole's report, Reeves's recording, the court notification. Rosa listened without interrupting, taking notes in small, precise handwriting. When we finished, she was quiet for a moment. 5 days is workable, she said. Not comfortable, but workable. She reviewed what we had. Cole's report was strong. The Reeves recording was significant, but would face authentication challenges. The recantation was valuable, though James's attorneys would argue pressure. What you have establishes that Arthur's cognitive function is intact, she said, and that someone falsified medical evidence. What it does not yet establish is the underlying motive. For that, I need full access to the business accounts, property records, and estate documentation. She looked at me. And I need to know who else has had access to those documents. She paused. There is one more thing. What you have is strong on defense, but a competent opposing attorney can construct alternative explanations for each piece individually. We need something that cannot be explained away. His own words, in his own voice, describing what he was doing and why. I looked at Thomas. Thomas looked at Rosa. The room was quiet, except for the sound of the clock on the wall behind her desk. We will find it, Thomas said. The first call came at 7 in the morning. I was in the kitchen with a cup of coffee. Real coffee, from a bag I had bought myself the evening before, when the phone started. It was Bill Dawkins, who had been distributing Whitfield cider to restaurants and farm stands across the valley for 15 years. His voice had the particular quality of a man who wants to give someone the benefit of the doubt but is no longer sure he should. Arthur, I got something I need you to hear. He played it through the phone speaker. 32 seconds of audio. A voice that sounded like mine. The same cadence, the same slight flatness on certain vowels, the same pauses, in roughly the right places. The voice said that it had always been my intention to pass Whitfield orchards to family, that James Caldwell was the right man for it, that the transfer at $1 was a gift freely given and long considered. I listened to it twice without saying anything. That is not me, I said. Bill said he did not know what to think. I told him not to do anything yet, and that I would call him back within the hour. Then I hung up and called Thomas from the hallway. He was downstairs in 4 minutes, still pulling on his jacket, and I handed him the phone with the audio file Bill had forwarded. He listened once. Then he put it on speaker and listened again. Eyes closed. His head tilted slightly the way he does when he is paying close attention. Then he listened a third time. On the fourth pass, he stopped it at the 17-second mark. What is the full legal name of the business? He said. Exactly. I looked at him. Whitfield Orchards. Has been since 1981. He turned the phone screen toward me and pressed play from the beginning. At the 11-second mark, the voice, my voice, or the thing wearing my voice, referred to the business as Whitfield Appleworks. I heard it clearly, the second time now that I was listening for it. 3 words that had never appeared on a tax document, a business license, a contract, or a sign in 42 years of operation. 3 words assembled from something I actually said. My Apple operation. An offhand phrase I used in casual conversation, in radio interviews with the Valley station, in the kind of loose talk that happens when a journalist asks you to describe your business and you reach for the nearest shorthand. Whatever had built this recording had been trained on that shorthand, and whoever had deployed it had been too confident in the output to check the details. He did not listen to it all the way through, Thomas said. He said it the way you state a fact about weather. Or he listened and did not catch it because he does not actually know the name. I thought about that. In 7 years of family dinners and holidays and Sunday visits, I could not recall James ever referring to the business by its proper name. He called it the orchard, or the farm, or the operation, the kind of generic language that works fine until precision matters. It had mattered this time. If you are still here, comment the word orchard, so I know you are with me. And be honest. If you discovered that someone had built a fake version of your voice to steal everything you had spent your life building, would you fight back or walk away? Before we go further, some parts of this story include fictional elements added for storytelling purposes. Not everything may reflect reality, but the message behind it is worth your attention. Thomas found the audio analyst through Rosa Martinez's office. A woman named Sandra Liu, who operated an independent forensic audio practice and had testified in 3 federal cases in the past 2 years. We were in her office by 10:30. She asked for the original file and the forwarding metadata from Bill's email. She worked quietly for 40 minutes, while Thomas and I sat in chairs across from her workstation and did not talk much. Then she turned her monitor toward us and walked us through what she had found. The file had artifacts consistent with neural audio synthesis, microscopic irregularities in the breath patterns between phrases, a flatness in the ambient room tone that did not match any natural recording environment, and a specific kind of transition smoothing at the 17-second mark, precisely where the splice between 2 source samples had been joined. She could not name the specific tool used, but she could state with professional certainty that the recording was not a capture of a live human voice. She would have a written report ready by end of day. I called Rosa from the parking lot. She said to get the report to her as soon as available, and that it changed the shape of the counterfiling considerably. A fabricated audio document distributed to business associates to undermine the subject's professional standing. That was not the action of someone trying to protect a vulnerable family member. That was the action of someone trying to eliminate opposition. It helps us establish intent, Rosa said. Keep going. I spent the rest of the afternoon on the phone. The same names I had called through Thomas the day before, plus 4 more, who had reached out after hearing the recording. I told each of them the same thing. The audio was synthetic, forensically confirmed. I would have documentation in their hands by morning. I told them I understood if they needed time. I told them the orchard had been running on my name and my word for 42 years, and I was not asking them to take either on faith. I was asking them to wait 24 hours for the paper. Most of them waited. One did not. Pete Garland, who ran a chain of farm-to-table restaurants in Charlottesville and had been carrying Whitfield cider on his menu for 9 years, called back at 4 in the afternoon and said he was suspending the account pending resolution of the legal matter. He was polite about it. I was polite back. I noted it and moved on. The math was still in our favor. For now, by 11 that night, Thomas and I were at the kitchen table with the full evidence file spread between us. Physical copies of everything organized in the sequence Rosa had specified. Cole's report, Reeves's recantation and the recording, the forensic audio analysis. The mortgage documentation Earl had flagged. The court petition and the timeline Rosa had reconstructed, showing the sequence of James's moves going back further than any of us had initially realized. Thomas was going through the property records for the 3rd time, making notes in the margin of a legal pad, when his phone rang. He looked at the screen. Then he looked at me. The number was unfamiliar. 10 digits. Area code 859. I did not recognize the number, but I knew that area code. 859 was Lexington, Kentucky, the same city where Helen's friend Louise had found the newspaper clipping about Daniel Marsh, the same city where a retired colonel had lost a horse farm and then lost everything else. Thomas picked up the phone and put it on speaker before he said a word. The voice that came through the speaker was a woman's, measured, careful, with the particular flatness of someone who has rehearsed what they are going to say enough times that the emotion has been pressed out of it, leaving only the shape of the words. My name is Grace Patterson. I am calling from Lexington, Kentucky. I believe the man your family knows as James Caldwell is the same man who destroyed my family 11 years ago. Neither Thomas nor I moved. The kitchen was very still. The clock on the wall above the stove ticked once, twice, 3 times before Grace spoke again. She spoke without pausing for questions, as if she had learned from experience that interruptions broke the thread and she needed to get through it in one piece. Her grandfather was Colonel Roy Patterson, born 1939. Retired United States Army, 26 years of service, 2 tours in Vietnam. After the military, he had built a horse farm outside Lexington on 200 acres of bluegrass country that he worked with his own hands for 30 years. It was everything he had: the land, the horses, the name he had put on the gate. He used to say that a man who has his own ground under his feet does not need anyone's permission to stand up straight. Grace said that last part the way people say things they have heard so many times. The words have become part of their own architecture. In the spring of 2012, her older sister had married a man named Daniel Marsh. He was charming, attentive, the kind of man who made a point of getting along with the family patriarch. He asked questions about the farm. He studied the operation. He offered to help with the financial side of things because the colonel was getting older and the books were getting more complex. And it would be a kindness to take some of that weight off his shoulders. He was not in love with my sister, Grace said. He was in love with my grandfather's farm. The sequence she described was patient and methodical. Paperwork first. Daniel had a gift for finance, everyone said so. The colonel had been grateful to have someone younger handling the complexity. Then the gradual narrowing of the colonel's circle. A misunderstanding here, a missed occasion there, small frictions that accumulated until the people who might have noticed something were no longer in regular contact. By mid-2013, Daniel had consolidated signing authority over the primary accounts. In early 2014, he transferred the remaining assets and disappeared. Left the state, left the marriage, left nothing behind except a family that could not understand how it had happened. Colonel Roy Patterson was 75 years old when he lost everything. The farm was gone. The savings account he had kept separate, the one Grace had not even known existed, had been located and emptied in the final weeks before Daniel left. He did not understand, Grace said. He kept asking me how this was possible. He had trusted someone, and that trust had been the mechanism used against him. She paused. He passed away 14 months later in a nursing home outside Lexington. His doctor said it was his heart. I have always believed it was simpler than that. I think he just could not find a reason to keep going after the ground was taken out from under him. The kitchen was very quiet. Thomas was looking at the phone on the table. I was looking at the wall behind it, at nothing in particular. At the space where the air held the weight of what Grace Patterson was telling us. I thought about Colonel Roy Patterson at 75, trying to understand how the trust he had extended had been the instrument of his undoing. I thought about my own signature on a refinancing document I had not read. I thought about how close I had come to sitting in the same chair the colonel had sat in, asking the same question he had asked, understanding nothing. Grace continued. She had hired a private investigator in 2014. The trail went cold at the Kentucky state line. Daniel Marsh. The legal name, the social security number, the address history. All of it terminated when he left. Whoever he had been before Daniel Marsh, and whoever he became after, she could not reach. I kept the investigator on retainer, she said. I do not know exactly why. I think I needed to believe that eventually something would surface. Something had surfaced 3 days ago. The emergency guardianship petition filed by James Caldwell had appeared in the public docket of the Augusta County Court. Grace's investigator had flagged it as part of a routine search on financial elder abuse cases in Virginia. A search Grace had been running for years on the theory that a man who had done this once would do it again. The investigator had pulled the associated filings, found a photograph attached to a professional license document James had submitted, and compared it against the database of images accumulated over 11 years of searching. The match was not algorithmic. The investigator had looked at the 2 photographs side by side. Daniel Marsh in 2013, James Caldwell in 2024, and called Grace within the hour. He changed his name legally in 2015, Grace said. I confirmed it through a court record search this afternoon. Daniel Thomas Marsh became James Allen Caldwell. The filing is public record. A legal name change in a matter of public record that no one had thought to look for because no one had known there was anything to look for. How did you find this number? I asked. It was the first thing I had said since she started speaking. Virginia Nursing License Registry, Grace said. Public record. Your son's name appeared in the guardianship petition as next of kin. I cross-referenced and found a contact number on file. She paused. I almost did not call. I was not sure you would believe me. We believe you, Thomas said. I am sending a photograph now, Grace said. Daniel Marsh, taken in October of 2013 at a business event in Lexington. My grandfather is in the photograph. Daniel is standing next to him. Thomas's laptop was already open. He pulled up the email, found the message, and opened the attachment. The photograph was slightly grainy, taken in a banquet hall with overhead lighting. There were 8 or 9 people in the frame. On the right side, standing next to an older man who had the bearing of someone who had spent his life in uniform, was a younger version of a face I had sat across from at dinner tables for 7 years. The hair was different. He was thinner. He had the open expression of a man at a social occasion who was enjoying himself. There was no question. I pulled the phone closer. Grace, I said. I want you to send everything you have to an attorney named Rosa Martinez in Richmond. Thomas will have her contact you first thing tomorrow morning. I kept my voice level. We have a hearing on Monday, 5 days from now. This ends for both of us. A silence on the line. Then Grace said quietly, I have been waiting a long time to hear someone say that. So have I said. And I only found out about it 4 days ago. Something that might have been a short, tired laugh came through the speaker. I will send everything tonight, she said. Thomas was already drafting an email to Rosa. The clock on the wall read midnight. 4 days left. It was Thomas who answered the second call that night. Not from Kentucky this time, but from a number neither of us recognized. The voice on the other end was quiet, almost too quiet, and it took me a full 3 seconds to realize it was my daughter. Meredith had not called me directly in over 4 months. Every conversation had gone through James. Every visit had been supervised. Every answer she gave sounded like it had been approved before it left her mouth. So when I heard her say my name, just my name, nothing else, I gripped the edge of the kitchen table and held my breath. She said she did not have long. James was at a meeting in Harrisonburg and would not be back until after midnight. She had driven to a gas station off Route 11, parked behind the building where no cameras pointed, and was calling from a prepaid phone she had bought 3 weeks earlier with cash. She told us all of this in one unbroken sentence, the way a person speaks when they have rehearsed every word and know they will not get a second chance. Thomas put the phone on speaker and set it on the table between us. Rosa leaned forward. Grace Patterson, still sitting across from me with the Colonel Roy file open in front of her, closed her notebook and listened. Meredith said she was sending something. A package. She had mailed it 2 days earlier from a post office in Waynesboro. Not Staunton, because James monitored the Staunton post office cameras through a security app on his phone. The package would arrive at Earl Hammond's address, not ours, because James also checked our mailbox remotely through a camera he had installed on the fence post nearest the road. She said this without emotion, as though describing the layout of a house she no longer lived in by choice. Thomas asked what was in the package. Meredith paused. I could hear the wind outside wherever she was parked and the low hum of a truck passing on the highway. Then she told us. Inside the package was a USB drive. On that drive were 187 files. Audio recordings, video clips, photographs of documents, screenshots of text messages, and emails. And every single one of them had been captured over the past 14 months by a device hidden inside a pair of pearl earrings. I did not understand at first. Thomas looked at me, then at the phone. Rosa asked Meredith to repeat what she had said. Meredith did, and this time her voice broke slightly on the word earrings. They were Helen's pearl earrings. The pair I had given Helen for our 25th anniversary in 2006. Small, elegant, with a white gold setting that Helen wore almost every Sunday and every holiday for 15 years. After Helen died, I had given the earrings to Meredith, along with a few other pieces of jewelry. Because Meredith had always admired them, and because Helen would have wanted her to have them. What I did not know, what none of us knew, was that Meredith had taken the earrings to a private investigator in Charlottesville 11 months after Helen died. She had paid the investigator $2,200 in cash to modify the left earring. He installed a micro camera and a short-range wireless transmitter inside the setting, replacing the original backing with a custom housing that looked identical to the original. The battery lasted roughly 6 hours per charge. Meredith charged it each night in a small case she kept inside a locked drawer in her classroom at the elementary school, the one room James never entered. She had been wearing those earrings during every important conversation for 14 months, every dinner where James discussed finances, every phone call he made in the living room while she sat nearby, every meeting with Dr. Reeves where James handed over envelopes, every late-night argument where James told her what would happen to her father if she did not cooperate. 187 files. Thomas asked why she had not come to us sooner. Meredith was quiet for a long time. When she spoke again, her voice was flat and careful, the voice of someone who had learned that walls have ears and that even silence could be used against you. She said James had told her, early in their marriage, that if she ever tried to leave or contact Arthur or Thomas without permission, he would accelerate the guardianship filing immediately. He would present the medical reports, the forged cognitive assessments, the financial records showing Arthur's supposed incompetence, and he would have Arthur declared unfit within 30 days. Meredith said she believed him because she had watched him do exactly that to Colonel Roy Patterson's family in Kentucky, though she did not know the name at the time. She only knew that James had once told her, during a particularly bad argument, that he had done this before, and that the last old man had not even made it to the courthouse. Grace Patterson closed her eyes when she heard that. Meredith said she had started wearing the earrings the day after that argument. She said she knew she could not fight James directly. He was too careful, too organized, too prepared. But she could record. She could document. She could build a file so complete that when the time came, and she had to believe the time would come, no judge in Augusta County could look at the evidence and side with James Caldwell. She asked if we had received Earl's package yet. Thomas said no. Not yet. Probably tomorrow morning. Meredith said she had to go. She would try to call again before the hearing, but she could not promise. She asked me to do one thing. She asked me to forgive her for waiting so long. I told her there was nothing to forgive. I told her that her mother would be proud. I told her I loved her. And then the line went dead. And the kitchen was silent, except for the ticking of the clock above the stove. Thomas stood up and walked to the window. Rosa was already writing. Grace reopened her notebook, and I sat at the table, thinking about a pair of pearl earrings I had bought 20 years ago for a woman who taught our daughter, without ever saying a word, that the quietest resistance is sometimes the strongest. Earl called at 6:14 the next morning. The package had arrived. The Augusta County Courthouse is a red brick building on East Johnson Street in Staunton. I had been inside it twice before in my life, once in 1982 when I filed the deed for the orchard, and once in 2003 when Helen and I updated our wills after Thomas graduated law school. Both times the hallways smelled like old wood and floor polish. And both times I walked out feeling like the law was something solid, something you could lean against when the ground shifted beneath you. I wanted to believe that was still true. We arrived at 8:15 on Monday morning. Thomas drove. Rosa sat in the passenger seat with a brown leather briefcase on her lap that held every piece of evidence we had gathered in the past 5 days. I sat in the back, wearing the only suit I still owned, a navy blue one Helen had picked out for me in 2016. It was slightly loose around the shoulders now. I had not worn it since her funeral. The courtroom was on the second floor. Room 214. It was smaller than I expected, with dark wooden benches, a low ceiling, and fluorescent lights that buzzed faintly above the judge's bench. The windows faced east, and the morning sun came through the glass at a low angle, casting long rectangular shapes across the floor. There were maybe 30 seats in the gallery. Most of them were empty. James was already there. He sat on the left side of the aisle, behind a long table, wearing a charcoal suit and a blue tie. His posture was perfect. His hands were folded on the table in front of him. Beside him sat Hargrove, the same lawyer who had appeared at the cider house the morning of the accident. Hargrove had a stack of folders arranged in a neat row. James did not look at me when I walked in. He looked straight ahead, at the judge's bench, as though this was a meeting he had scheduled himself and was simply waiting for it to begin on time. Meredith was not there. I had expected that. She had told us on the phone she would try to come, but that James monitored her car's GPS through an app and would know immediately if she drove to the courthouse. Thomas had arranged for Earl to pick her up at a grocery store parking lot in Waynesboro and bring her through a side entrance if she could get away. But that was not certain, and I tried not to think about it. Rosa opened her briefcase and arranged her materials on the right side table. Thomas sat behind me in the first row of the gallery. I could feel him there without turning around. The way you feel the trunk of a tree at your back when you lean against it. Grace Patterson sat 3 rows behind Thomas, wearing a dark green coat and holding a manila folder on her knees. Sandra Lou sat beside her, a laptop bag at her feet. The judge entered at 9 o'clock. The Honorable Catherine Avery. She was perhaps 60, with short gray hair and reading glasses on a chain around her neck. She moved slowly, settled into her chair, and surveyed the room over the tops of her glasses for a long moment before she spoke. She said this was a hearing on an emergency petition for guardianship filed by James David Caldwell on behalf of Arthur Whitfield, and she intended to hear both sides fully before making any determination. Her voice was even and unhurried, the voice of someone who had sat through 1,000 hearings and did not intend to rush the 1,001st. Hargrove went first. He stood, buttoned his jacket, and spoke for 12 minutes. He described an elderly man in cognitive decline. He cited missed appointments, erratic financial decisions, an inability to manage daily affairs. He referenced a medical evaluation conducted by Dr. Samuel Reeves, a licensed psychiatrist in Staunton, who had concluded that Arthur Whitfield displayed significant markers of early-stage dementia and recommended immediate supervised care. Hargrove presented the evaluation as Exhibit A and placed it on the judge's bench. I sat still and listened to a stranger describe a version of me that did not exist. It was like hearing someone read an obituary for a man who was still breathing. Rosa stood when it was her turn. She did not button her jacket. She did not touch her notes. She looked at the judge and said that every claim made by the petitioner was built on fabricated evidence, and that she intended to prove it within the hour. She called Dr. Miriam Cole first. Dr. Cole took the stand, identified herself as a board-certified internist with 23 years of practice, and described the examination conducted on me 4 days earlier at her clinic in Staunton. She presented the full blood panel results. 12 vials. Every standard cognitive marker within normal range for a man my age. No signs of dementia. No signs of cognitive impairment. What she did find was a low but consistent level of a benzodiazepine compound in my bloodstream. A sedative that, when administered in small doses over weeks or months, could produce symptoms that mimicked early cognitive decline. Memory lapses, fatigue, confusion, difficulty concentrating. Exactly the symptoms Dr. Reeves had attributed to dementia. Judge Avery removed her glasses and looked at the blood panel report for a long time. Rosa then played the recording. Thomas had captured it on his phone 4 days earlier in Dr. Reeves's office. The audio was clear. Reeves's voice was unmistakable. He described the $40,000 James had paid him over 18 months. He described the specific instructions James had given for the cognitive evaluation. He described the 2014 prescription error James had used as leverage. He said he knew the evaluation was fraudulent when he signed it and that he had agreed to testify falsely if the case reached court. Hargrove objected. Judge Avery overruled him without looking up from the transcript Rosa had provided alongside the audio. The courtroom was very quiet. James had not moved. His hands were still folded. His expression had not changed. But I noticed that Hargrove leaned toward him and whispered something, and James did not respond. He simply stared at the judge's bench. The way a man stares at a locked door when he realizes the key in his pocket no longer fits. Rosa looked at her notes, then at the judge. She said she had 3 more witnesses and asked permission to call the next one. Judge Avery nodded. Rosa turned toward the gallery and said the name clearly, so that every person in the room could hear it. Grace Patterson. Grace stood, smoothed her coat, and walked toward the witness stand carrying the manila folder that held 40 years of a dead man's stolen life. Grace Patterson took the stand the way a person walks into a room they have been waiting years to enter. She sat down, adjusted the microphone, and placed the manila folder flat on the ledge in front of her. She did not open it immediately. She looked at the judge, then at James, and then she began. She said her name was Grace Eleanor Patterson. She said she was 71 years old and that she had traveled from Lexington, Kentucky to be in this courtroom today. She said she had spent the past 11 years trying to find the man sitting at the petitioner's table and that she knew him not as James David Caldwell, but as Daniel Thomas Marsh. Hargrove stood immediately. He objected on the grounds of relevance. Judge Avery looked at Rosa. Rosa said the testimony was directly relevant to the petitioner's credibility, character, and pattern of conduct. Judge Avery told Grace to continue. Grace opened the folder. Inside were photocopies of police reports, financial records, a photograph from the Lexington Herald-Leader dated 2014, and a notarized affidavit from a retired detective in Fayette County. She handed each document to the clerk, who passed them to the judge. She told the story simply. In 2012, a man named Daniel Thomas Marsh had moved to Lexington and befriended Colonel Roy Patterson, Grace's father-in-law. Roy was 78, a widower, a retired Army officer with a pension, a house, and a 40-acre horse farm outside the city. Daniel volunteered at the VFW where Roy spent his Friday afternoons. He drove Roy to doctor's appointments. He helped with the yard work. Within 8 months, he had moved into the guest room and had been added as a co-signer on Roy's primary bank account. Over the next 14 months, Daniel systematically drained Roy's accounts. He refinanced the horse farm at 80% of its assessed value. He arranged for a psychiatrist, paid in cash, to evaluate Roy and declare him cognitively unfit. He filed a guardianship petition in Fayette County Court. Roy died of a stroke 6 weeks before the hearing, and Daniel disappeared the same week, taking approximately $370,000 in liquid assets and leaving the farm in foreclosure. Grace paused. She said the Fayette County prosecutor had opened an investigation but could never locate Daniel Marsh. He had no forwarding address, no active phone number, no digital footprint after 2014, until 11 months ago, when a woman named Louise Whitfield, Helen's college friend, had contacted Grace through a victims advocacy network and sent her a photograph of a man attending a family dinner in Staunton, Virginia. The man in the photograph was James David Caldwell. And Grace said she would stake everything she had left on the fact that he was Daniel Thomas Marsh. James did not move, but I saw something change behind his eyes, a small shift, like a curtain being drawn an inch to one side. Hargrove whispered to him again. This time James shook his head once, sharply, without turning. Rosa called Sandra Lou next. Sandra took the stand with her laptop and a portable speaker. She identified herself as an independent forensic audio analyst with 12 years of experience and testimony in 3 federal cases. Rosa asked her to play the 32-second audio clip that had been sent to Bill Dawkins, the clip in which a voice resembling mine authorized the transfer of Whitfield orchards to James Caldwell for $1. Sandra played the clip. My voice filled the courtroom, or what sounded like my voice. Sandra then played it a second time, slowed to half speed, and pointed out 3 anomalies. At 11 seconds, the recording referred to the business as Whitfield Apple Works, a name that has never appeared on any legal document, tax filing, or commercial registration in 42 years of operation. At 17 seconds, there was a clean splice, a digital cut and join that left a micro gap of 0.04 seconds invisible at normal speed but unmistakable under analysis. And throughout the entire clip, the breath patterns were mathematically regular, spaced at identical intervals, which does not occur in natural human speech. Sandra said the clip was generated using neural voice synthesis technology and was not a recording of a living person. She submitted her full report as an exhibit. Judge Avery set down her pen and looked at James for the first time since the hearing began. Then the side door of the courtroom opened. I heard it before I saw it, the soft click of the latch, the faint creak of the hinge. I turned in my seat. Thomas turned. Rosa turned. Even Judge Avery looked up. Meredith walked in. She was wearing a gray sweater and dark pants, and her hair was pulled back the way Helen used to wear hers on Sundays. Earl was behind her, holding the door. Meredith's face was pale, and her hands were clasped in front of her. But she walked steadily, without hesitation, straight down the center aisle, toward the front of the courtroom. She was wearing the pearl earrings. Rosa asked the judge for permission to call one final witness. Judge Avery granted it. Meredith took the stand. Rosa handed her a USB drive and asked her to identify it. Meredith said it contained 187 files recorded over 14 months using a micro camera concealed inside the left pearl earring she was currently wearing. She said she had commissioned the modification herself and had documented every conversation, every transaction, every threat she had witnessed or been subjected to during that period. Rosa asked the court's permission to play 3 selected files. Judge Avery nodded. The first file was a video, slightly angled, shot from the level of Meredith's left ear. It showed James sitting across a kitchen table, sliding an envelope toward Dr. Reeves and saying, "Same as last month, and make sure the next evaluation is worse than the first." The second file was audio. James's voice, clear and unhurried, telling Meredith that if she contacted her father or brother without his knowledge, he would have Arthur declared incompetent within 30 days and sell the orchard before anyone could stop him. The third file was video again. James on the phone, pacing in a living room, telling someone that the old man was almost done and that by spring the property would be liquid. The courtroom was silent. Judge Avery removed her glasses and set them on the bench. She looked at James Caldwell, or Daniel Thomas Marsh, or whatever name he would carry next, and she said she had heard enough to make a preliminary determination. She denied the guardianship petition. She ordered James Caldwell to surrender his passport and remain within the jurisdiction of Augusta County, pending a full criminal investigation. She instructed the clerk to forward the hearing transcript and all submitted evidence to the Augusta County Commonwealth's attorney and to the Fayette County prosecutor in Kentucky. 2 deputies approached the petitioner's table. James stood slowly. He buttoned his jacket, the way he had buttoned it at the start of the hearing, as though habit was the last thing a man holds on to when everything else is taken. He did not look at me. He did not look at Meredith. He looked straight ahead as they led him through the side door, and then he was gone. We did not speak in the car on the way home. Thomas drove. Meredith sat in the back seat behind him, and I sat beside her. The road from Staunton to the farm takes about 25 minutes if you follow Route 250 west and turn south past Churchville. And in those 25 minutes, none of us said a single word. The only sound was the tires on the asphalt and the low hum of the heater Thomas had turned on even though the morning was not particularly cold. I think we were all afraid that if we spoke too soon, something would break. Not between us, but inside us. The kind of breaking that happens when you have held something together for so long that the relief of letting go is more dangerous than the weight itself. Meredith's hands were in her lap. She had taken off the pearl earrings in the courthouse hallway and placed them in a small velvet pouch she kept in her coat pocket. I had watched her do it. She held them for a moment before putting them away, turning them over in her palm the way Helen used to do when she was thinking about something she was not ready to say out loud. Then she zipped the pouch closed, put it in her pocket, and walked beside me without looking back at the building. When we turned onto the gravel road that leads to the farm, Meredith leaned forward slightly and looked through the windshield. I watched her eyes move across the landscape. The fence posts, the stone wall I built in 1983, the equipment shed with the green roof, the rows of apple trees stretching out toward the western ridge where the Blue Ridge Mountains sit low and steady against the sky. She had not been to the farm in over 7 months, and I could see her taking it in the way you take in a room you once lived in, after being away so long that everything looks both familiar and strange at the same time. Thomas parked near the house. Earl was standing on the porch. He had a thermos of coffee in one hand and 3 mugs in the other, and he did not ask any questions. He just set the mugs on the railing and poured, and we stood there for a while, the 4 of us, drinking coffee and looking out at the orchard in the mid-morning light. It was Meredith who finally spoke. She said she wanted to see the tree. I knew which tree she meant. We all did. The old winesap stands about 200 yards from the house. At the far end of the original row, Helen and I planted in 1981. It is the first tree we ever put into this ground. Its trunk is thick and scarred, and its branches spread wide enough to shade a circle roughly 30 feet across. The storm 2 weeks earlier had broken one of its largest limbs, the one that had concealed Helen's journal in its hollow. The wound was still fresh, the exposed wood pale against the dark bark. Helen is buried 3 steps to the east of that trunk. There is no headstone. She did not want one. She asked me to plant a second winesap beside the first, a young tree that would grow next to the old one the way she said we had grown next to each other for 40 years. I planted it the week after she died. It is small still, barely 8 feet tall, but it is healthy, and its roots have taken hold. We walked together. Thomas on my left, Meredith on my right, and Earl a few steps behind. The grass was wet from the night's dew, and our shoes left dark tracks across the field. When we reached the tree, Meredith stopped. She stood very still, looking at the place where her mother lay, and I could see her shoulders begin to tremble. I did not say anything. I just put my arm around her. She leaned into me, and for the first time in years I felt my daughter's full weight against my side, not the careful, measured distance she had kept whenever James was near, but the real weight of her, the way she used to lean against me when she was a girl, and the world was something I could still protect her from. She cried quietly. Not the kind of crying that needs words or comfort, but the kind that simply needs to happen. The way rain needs to fall when the air has held too much for too long. Thomas stood on the other side of the tree. He had one hand on the trunk. His eyes were closed. I could see his jaw working, the way it does when he is trying to keep himself steady, and I thought about what Helen had written in her letter. He has my eyes, but your stubbornness. She was right about both. After a long time, Meredith lifted her head and wiped her face with the back of her hand. She looked at me and said something I will carry with me for whatever years I have left. She said, "I thought he had closed every door, but you were still here." I told her the door was never closed. I told her it could not be closed, because the door was not a door at all. It was a piece of land and a row of trees and a house with a kitchen where the coffee is always on and the porch light stays lit until everyone is home. I told her the door was her mother's voice in the walls, and her brother's footprints in the mud, and her father's hands in the dirt. You cannot close a door that is built from those things. You can only walk away from it for a while, and hope it is still standing when you come back. She nodded. She did not say anything else. She did not need to. Earl walked over and refilled our mugs from the thermos he had carried down from the house. The coffee was still warm. We stood beneath the winesap tree, the 4 of us, drinking coffee in the quiet morning. And for the first time in 5 days, I did not feel the weight of what had been done to me. I felt only the weight of what remained. And it was enough. Thomas checked his phone. Rosa had sent a message. The Commonwealth's attorney had formally opened an investigation. Fayette County had issued a warrant. The legal process would take months, perhaps longer. There would be depositions, hearings, paperwork. James Caldwell, or Daniel Marsh, or whoever he would become next, would face charges in 2 states. But that was for the courts now. That was for the law and the lawyers and the slow machinery of justice. What was for me was this: the tree, the field, my son and my daughter standing beside me on the land their mother and I had built. The door was open, and they had walked through it, and I was not standing in it alone. 3 weeks passed. The law moved at its own pace, the way it always does, slow and deliberate and indifferent to the rhythms of the people it serves. Rosa called every few days with updates. The Augusta County Commonwealth's attorney had convened a grand jury. Fayette County had formally extradited its warrant. James Caldwell, listed now in court documents under both names, was being held without bond in the Augusta County Regional Jail, pending arraignment on charges of fraud, forgery, identity theft, elder exploitation, and conspiracy to administer a controlled substance without consent. Hargrove had withdrawn as his attorney. No new counsel had entered an appearance. I did not follow the details closely. Thomas did. He sat at the kitchen table each evening with his laptop open and a yellow legal pad beside it, tracking motions and filings the way he used to track box scores when he was 12 years old, and loved baseball more than anything in the world. He had taken a leave from his firm in Richmond. He said it was temporary. I did not ask when he planned to go back, and he did not offer a date. Meredith moved into the guest room on the 2nd floor, the room that used to be hers when she was a girl. She brought 2 suitcases and a cardboard box of books and not much else. The first morning she was back, I came downstairs and found her standing at the kitchen counter making coffee. She had the pot on, the mugs out, and a carton of eggs beside the stove. She looked up when she heard me and said good morning, and the way she said it, simple, unhurried, without checking the doorway behind her, told me more about what had changed than any conversation could. She went back to teaching the following Monday. 4th grade at a school in Waynesboro. The principal had held her position. Meredith said the children asked where she had been, and she told them she had been taking care of her father, which was true in a way that only she and I understood. Earl and I spent the first week after the hearing doing what we should have been doing all along. We walked every row. We inspected every tree. We opened every ledger, every invoice, every account statement going back 3 years, and we compared them against the records Helen had kept in her journal. The damage was real, but not irreversible. James had diverted approximately $91,000 through the refinance and a series of smaller transfers. Rosa said most of it was recoverable through the legal process, though it would take time. The orchard itself was intact. The trees did not care who signed the mortgage papers. They only cared about the soil and the rain and the slow turning of the seasons, and all 3 of those were still exactly where they had always been. The harvest came in the 3rd week of October, the way it does every year. Honeycrisp first, then Fuji, then the late-season wine saps that Helen always said tasted better after the first frost. Earl brought in a crew of 12, the same crew he had used for the past 6 years, and they moved through the rows with ladders and baskets and the steady, practiced rhythm of people who know the work and do not need to be told how to do it. I worked beside them. Not as much as I once did, and not as fast, but I was there. I carried baskets. I sorted fruit at the grading table. I drove the flatbed between the rows the way I have driven it every October since 1984, when Thomas was 2 years old and Helen would set him on the seat beside me in a car seat she had bolted to the bench with 2 clamps and a prayer. On the last day of the harvest, a Saturday, Thomas and Meredith both came out to the orchard. Thomas rolled up his sleeves and picked alongside the crew for 3 hours without stopping. Meredith sat at the grading table with Earl, sorting apples into bins the way Helen had taught her when she was 9 years old. She was fast. Her hands moved with a sureness that surprised me, as though the knowledge had been stored somewhere in her body all these years, waiting for a reason to come back. That evening we pressed cider. The first batch of the season. Earl ran the press, while Thomas fed the hopper, and Meredith and I washed the bottles. The kitchen smelled like apples and wood smoke and the faint sweetness of the fermenting juice. And for a moment I closed my eyes and let the smell carry me back to every autumn I had lived on this land. 42 of them. Each one different. Each one the same. We ate dinner on the porch. Fried chicken that Meredith made from Helen's recipe, coleslaw, biscuits, and a pitcher of fresh cider, so cold the glass sweated in the evening air. Earl stayed. He always stays for the last day dinner. He has for 26 years. We did not talk about James. We did not talk about the hearing or the charges or the months of legal proceedings still ahead. We talked about the harvest. We talked about the weather. Thomas told a story about a time he fell out of a Honeycrisp tree when he was 10 and landed in a wheelbarrow full of rotten apples, and Meredith laughed so hard she put her hand over her mouth the way Helen used to do when something caught her off guard. After dinner, when Earl had gone home and Thomas and Meredith had gone upstairs, I walked out to the winesap tree alone. The moon was nearly full, and the orchard was silver and black, and perfectly still. I stood beside Helen's tree, the young one, the one I planted the week she died, and I put my hand on its trunk. It was cool and smooth, and I could feel the life in it, the slow pulse of a living thing that is exactly where it is supposed to be. I thought about what Meredith had said at the courthouse. I thought he had closed every door, but you were still here. And I thought about what I had told her, that the door was not really a door at all. Standing there in the moonlight, I understood something I had not been able to put into words before. A family is not a thing you build once and then protect. A family is a thing you rebuild every single day, with every conversation and every silence, every meal and every absence, every truth you speak and every lie you refuse to believe. It is not the house or the land or the name on the deed. It is the willingness to keep showing up even when someone has tried to take it all away from you, even when the people you love have been turned against you. Even when the door looks closed from the outside. The door was never closed. I know that now. And as long as this orchard stands, as long as these trees bear fruit, as long as there is someone willing to walk down that gravel road and come home, it never will be. My name is Arthur Whitfield. I am 73 years old. I own 85 acres of apple trees in the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia. And this is my story. If any part of this story stayed with you, I would be grateful if you shared it with someone you trust. Sometimes, the people who need to hear a story the most are the ones who would never search for it on their own. Subscribe if you have not already. Leave a comment if something in this story reminded you of your own family. And take care of the people who take care of you. Because the ones who love you quietly are often the ones who save you completely.